Hey everyone, welcome back to the CEO Next Door podcast. I'm your host, Mike Mayer, CEO of Main Event Digital. With me today is Donovan Morrison, COO of Main Event Digital, and my co-host. Our goal of this podcast uh, is a focus on founder stories. We want to rewind, get back to where people started, and learn about the journey of how our guests have become successful and what that path and journey has been like. So today our guest is Billy Banks, and I will turn the mic over to Donovan to introduce Billy because he is, and Billy are friends.
Yes. Cannot wait to have Billy on the podcast today. I got to know Billy from my time with Lunalights. He was instrumental in building that business. He was our very first mentor when we were still conceptualizing the idea and the business, and was alongside us every step of the way from really the origin to the end. And Billy has had just an incredible career, a variety of different industries and positions, from teaching to working at his family's steel company to now, I believe, even doing some executive coaching. So we're thrilled to have Billy on the show today. Billy, I think it would be awesome if you can just introduce yourself and maybe provide our listeners with a high level overview of who you are and some of your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Donovan. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the intro. Currently I live in Chicago, father of almost 3 8-year-olds. And currently I'm in an interesting transitional phase in my career, having come through the pandemic and, like a lot of people, reevaluating, how we want to work and where we want to work. So at present, I am the absentee owner of a small steel business in Indiana. I teach a class that I co-created at Northwestern University on resilience and productivity, which has been really well received. And out of that effort really is what sort of led me to what I'm doing now. My students liked the class so much, they said, "Hey, you should start blogging." And blogging, okay, there's a lot of people doing that. What am I going to talk about? And then the class really came together, launched a blog earlier this year. And through that, I got introduced to the world of coaching last year when I was building the blog and doing the writing. And because I was really looking for something that integrated with the teaching and with the writing, that built on what I love doing, which is inspiring, guiding, mentoring, and, as it turns out, coaching other people. So I'm about a third of the way through the certification process in coaching, and actually came from a meeting this morning talking with some folks about how I want to go forward with that post-certification, what type of coaching business I want to create, because I have, with my background in startups, I've worked with Techstars and looking to do some work with some other coaching business and create my own content, workshops, classroom type stuff to fill in some gaps, especially in a small and medium-sized business. So I'm in the exploratory phases of that, learning and growing as a coach in ways that I didn't anticipate, and have been very eye-opening and welcoming to me, both as a human being, as a father, and as I guess an employee or owner. So.
Yeah, sounds like a very logical next step given your career progression. But I think before we go any further, we'd love to take it back to the beginning. How did you first get the entrepreneurial bug or itch? Were your parents entrepreneurs? Did you start any businesses when you were younger and growing up? Would love to hear the Billy backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a, to the notion of your podcast, trying to understand, people and their different ways of getting here. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, even though I didn't really recognize it growing up as a kid. When I was growing up, entrepreneurship wasn't really even a word that was bandied about too much. And if it was often derogatory or kind of negative. People were like, "Oh, Richard Branson or Ted Turner, these kind of crazy maverick guys." I was just like, I'm a small business owner. Even when I first started dating my now wife, a dozen years ago, I would have trouble articulating or introducing succinctly what I did. And she'd be like, "Dude, you're an entrepreneur. Just say that." And that was around the time where that word was getting a little more cachet and a little more popular and all-encompassing. So my grandfather started our family business, which was a forest products company, back in the 50s. He had 3 sons, the oldest of which was my father. that all came into the business. I, growing up, wanted nothing to do with it. I actually wanted to be a doctor. So I got into Northwestern University pre-med and had this little epiphany when I got there. Turns out that me and the sight of blood don't go along that well together. So it seems like something kind of important if you're going to be a doctor. So I realized after my fall quarter freshman year that maybe pre-med wasn't the right thing for me. So I tried econ, really loved macro, did not get along with micro so much. So did that for about a year and then switched again into history and political science with the thought process, maybe I'd be a lawyer, maybe politics, but more importantly, I'm going to learn how to read and write. And I'm in college. It's an opportunity to learn from professors that are passionate about those sort of source materials. Also didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with my life. So I tried a lot of things when I was an undergrad. I worked for a political campaign. I worked at the Cook County Prosecutor's Office. I worked at a consulting company. So I did a lot of things and learned a lot about what I didn't want to do. And then the summer between my junior and senior year, I worked at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And it was the first time I really got turned on to business and stocks and bonds and currencies. And my father and I started talking a lot more about business, and it got really interesting. I had a girlfriend, and it seemed like the logical thing to do was to move back to Indiana and join the family business. So I did that for 3 years, and we had a lumber side, which is the main part of our business, and then we had a steel division. And I started on the steel side of our business in what turned out to be a turnaround. So I got some wonderful experience the first 3 years of my career, learning all about how to, develop strategy, implement it, all about lean manufacturing, working with banks and understanding covenants and all that kind of stuff. And, fired a bunch of people, promoted people, like did everything that you can imagine under sort of the guise of turnaround. So this was leading up to the dot-com crash in 2001. And I was really into tech stocks. I was trading those, having fun with that. Almost took a job with Excite at Home, which was Excite was one of the early internet browsers with like Lycos and Yahoo and Alta Vista, and they bought At Home, which was a broadband provider. They were trying to combine pipes and content. And then once the dot-com crash started to happen, that disappeared, and it seemed like a good time to go get my MBA. So did 2 years down at Indiana Kelley School of Business in Bloomington. Had a great experience. Came in as marketing, thinking that I would learn how to do that. With the intent of not going back to the family business. But then 9/11 happened and all those marketing jobs went up in smoke. So I decided, I'm in business school. I'm going to learn how the world of finance. So I did that for 2 years. Never took one entrepreneurship class, never really considered it. And then I was working between my first and second year of business school. And I was in Paris. I was literally working for French food stamps because it was, dot-com era. So it was a great experience, both professionally and culturally, not so much economically, but I was in Paris, which is cool. One night I'm hanging out with an old friend, and she and I are sitting in her apartment, and we're talking about careers and life. And, I'm kind of lamenting this duty versus desire debate that I've been having for years with family business. A duty to it, but a desire to do something else. And she looks at me and says, well, it's a father's dream to pass their legacy on to their son. I'm like, oh. All right, well, I'm the oldest son. I guess I know what that means for me. So I called my father up. I said, hey, I'm your Huckleberry. I'm coming back. Let's do this. By the way, got this idea for a startup, and I don't want to live in Indiana. I'm going to live in Chicago and reverse commute. So I came back after that as the COO of our family business, which at the time was about a $150 million company. We had operations in 15 states, about 1,500 employees. So it was a pretty big business. And I brought all of my MBA skills and kind of tried to transition that from a very entrepreneurial kind of company that my father had run. He grew up in what I call the Wild West days of the industry, where it was just a land grab, and he was aggressive and moved fast, won. And then, like most industries, it matured and consolidated. And what got the family business to where it was, which was a lot of big, bold bets versus what we needed to do to sustain and grow in this different stage, was what I really focused on. So a lot of great experiences out of that. Meanwhile, I started my first company, which was a steel fabrication business, selling products into motorized RVs, which was not something I would have thought I would be doing if you'd asked me 10 years prior to that. Would I be working in the RV industry? Well, sure enough.
So were you working with like Airstreams or Winnebagos or?
Fleetwood was the name of the company. So
Okay.
yeah, Winnebago's in the boondocks in Iowa. So they're like their own self-sufficient little city and everything is right there.
Okay.
Airstream's over in Ohio and they do more of the towables and kind of, yeah, they're that iconic brand. So now we get to do, it was a really cool project that we did with a company called Fleetwood. We started with them and then we grew and diversified into towable RVs, slide outs, other products and accessories. And then I bought a steel stamping operation so we could supply our own parts. So grew that from starting it in 2003 until 2011 when I sold it. 3 years into the family business, realized this isn't really what, I realized it wasn't my passion, wasn't what I wanted to do. So did the same like MBA, got into my Michael Porter 5 forces analysis and realized that for us to survive, we either needed to get bigger or we needed to go away.
Mm-hmm.
So we made a play on a big regional competitor. Fortunately, they wanted too much money. So we went and sold to our biggest competitor about 6 to 9 months before the housing crash hit in 2007. So right
Okay.
6. So I guess maybe about a year before the wheels really came off.
Sure. So I'm curious, Billy, what was from your experience with the family business, what was the biggest learning that you took away from those early years that you implemented in the RV business that you started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the family business, my first 3 years when I came out undergrad was a lot of learning. One of the advantages of joining a family business like I did is you get to skip a lot of rungs on the ladder. So I got thrown right into the executive team working on a turnaround. So what I learned on the turnaround in terms of how to set up operations, how to communicate with customers, how to measure and incentivize your team were things that I really learned how to do and brought with me. So, I've always been a big fan of, an hourly, especially in manufacturing, a lot of companies tend to look at their employees as cost instead of, profit centers. And they design incentive systems that don't necessarily align with where management and the company's trying to go. And I learned at the family business, we had a whole bunch of issues with back injuries and workers' comp claims. And so we were paying an attendance bonus, which is kind of silly just to pay people for the one thing they're supposed to do, which is show up to work. So I'm like, what if we actually took that pool of money, made it bigger, but tied it to the things that the employees can control and can drive value for everybody? And in that case, it was safety because we're having all these workers' comp claims, quality, housekeeping, and then attendance became the qualifier to be able to get into that pool and earn more money. And then we graded them. And that grade was a multiplier on the amount of money that went into the pool. And I learned the power of alignment. Suddenly our managers weren't having to manage every one of these people and fight them to do the work. Suddenly the employees were coming to our managers and telling them, hey, they found safety equipment all of a sudden that had been sitting there behind, idle or collecting dust. They started finding new ways to be, pay more attention to quality because it directly impacted their paycheck. And then they also learned how to get rid of some of the riffraff, people that weren't performing or holding the rest of the team back, because they realized, hey, wait, if there's 30 of us and we can get rid of this guy or girl over here that's not contributing, well, the pie stays the same, but we now have, it's 29 pieces instead of 30. So we ended up actually paying more consistently as a bonus, but we're far more profitable. So I took that same mindset into every venture that I've had, really, especially when I've worked, in the manufacturing world where that hourly gap is different. What I learned from running a services business, because after we sold the family business, I started a company called Reach 360, which was a provider, think Zenefits before the cloud. We were providing HR and accounting services wrapped in IT to small and medium-sized businesses before the cloud was really a thing after that. And I learned a lot of lessons there, more so after the fact than I brought with me, but it was a great learning experience. And I can elaborate if you like, but
yeah, I mean, we're all about hitting on different lessons learned, because I feel like from episode to episode, we speak with founders who have all had various experiences in different verticals and spaces, and there's always something new that pops up. So I think it's interesting both for Mike and I, as well as our listeners, if you just do a deep dive into maybe with Reach 360, what did you see in that business that you had not experienced previously that maybe you still carry over to this day?
Yeah, what was interesting about, coming from manufacturing where you've got a physical product, I got really used to seeing, like you in Luna Lights, when you have a physical product, not only is it much more involved from all the pieces that it require to put it together, but then you've got this tangible thing in the world. I remember even when I was in the family business, I'd see, train cars or semis with lumber going down. I'm like, oh, I've been to that mill. I know that mill. Or I'd see an RV go by. And I'm like, I bet I got some parts in that thing. So that was always kind of cool. So when you create a services business, you're selling air. You're selling yourself in many respects, right? It's just a different model and it's a different mindset. And some of the things that I learned, when we had the family business and the idea of Reach 360 came out while we were selling the family business. Part of what I did when I was in the family business is we brought all of the back office functionality from the outlying plants and brought it to corporate. And then I pushed all of the profit decision-making out to the plants because I believe the plants should be profit centers and focused on operations and sales because they know the local market far better. Corporate should do national sales and then back office and support the plants. So we had brought in and consolidated payroll and IT and sort of all that back office and built this really high functioning team. So much so that we started actually offering some services out to other client or friendly people that we either made investments in or whatnot. And so we had some experience. So when MTech, I made an acquisition, started a new division and switched banks all in the same year. And the bank was really pushing me to hire a controller. And I'm like, I don't need a controller. I need equipment. I need working capital. I need people, not somebody in the back corner, counting the money, that was my naivety thinking that, so I was coming back from a trip and I was on a plane. It was literally the napkin moment. And I sketched out, I'm like, well, okay, I'm going through these pains. I don't really have a full-time accounting or HR need, but I'd love to be able to outsource it so that I could have that competency, but not have to pay somebody to sit there and figure out what to do with the rest of the time. And I was like, I wonder if there's other companies like that. So I wrote a business plan, pitched my VP HR and our controller and said, hey, I've got this idea. Now, a couple of mistakes that I learned in the beginning, two big ones. One, when you take a bureaucratic organization like our family business, where everybody's sort of used to the 9 to 5, very structured jobs, and then move them into an entrepreneurial company, it's two totally different worlds and totally different cultures. And I, being an entrepreneur, and like to do a lot of different things and, comfortable with change, couldn't understand what was, why my words weren't resonating with the team. I'd get up in front of them and I'd be like, hey, we're either going to work from home. And this is, because IBM had started doing this where they'd started shrinking their office space and having their, consultancy to work from home or work preferably at the client. Well, ours was outsourcing. So I'm like, all right, we're going to have an office, but this is really for meetings. Otherwise, work from the client, work from home. And I would get this just sort of look that your dog gives you when you take away their food bowl. Like, huh? What do you mean? I don't just come here, do my thing for 8 hours, take an hour lunch and go home. And, the pace of entrepreneur, at 5 o'clock, everybody was gone. I'm like, wait, but we've got all these things that we need to do. So I learned that the culture is really, really critical. Then the next thing I learned was equity. It was this is 2006. So that's 15 years ago. So I was 30, 29, 30 at the time. And, there was not the resources that there have been the last 5-10 years in entrepreneurship. I was a rat in a maze. I just figured it out. So another mistake I made is I didn't adjust salaries for some of my key people in exchange for equity. And then I didn't put any kind of equity plan. So that created some tension with my controller who eventually left. The HR guy, ended up getting his dream job as the athletic director of our local high school and took a big pay cut. Couldn't really compete with that because it's what he wanted to do. But I think had I known more about how to give equity or grant equity, and I could have saved a lot of money in the beginning instead of paying them market salaries for an established company versus startup salaries with equity, would have probably had some earlier, business would have been different earlier and I might have changed people. What ended up happening and what I've learned and carried with me since is I ended up hiring a consultant, and I'm not afraid to use consultants for specific things. And in this case, we were having big struggles with sales. And I couldn't figure out why. We had just hired this saleswoman, why she wasn't being successful, why this entrepreneurial thing wasn't catching on, why people weren't getting excited about it. So she did this assessment called Kolbe, Kolbe, which is all about how our MO is, what we're born with, the cognitive part of our brain. And I learned that most entrepreneurs have this thing that's called high quick start, which means we're good with ambiguity, we're good with change, we're multitaskers, we got a lot going on, but process is not necessarily our thing. Well, we had a lot of high fact finder, high follow through people, which meant that they needed a lot of information to make a decision, and they liked process, which means if you're trying to sell or trying to be entrepreneurial, it's like just throwing sand in the gears. So we use that information to do a couple of things. One, to get the right people in the right seats, because we did have some people that needed to be somewhere else. And then we got some people off the bus altogether that just weren't good fits for what we were trying to do. And then most importantly, we used Kolbe to inform how we hired, because we recognized that, you look at a resume and you get job qualifications, but it's really important to understand how a person is going to show up in that job. And Kolbe allows you to measure that. You can actually do a Kolbe assessment for the job and then have that individual fill out the Kolbe assessment. And if there's a gap of 3 or more, there's going to be stress or tension in the job, and you're just setting yourself up. And fortunately, unlike some personality assessments, at least back then, we could use it. It didn't violate any of the HR law. So we used that for our hiring, and it made a big difference. We ended up, turning over a little over a third of the company in terms of staffing, and then, but within 2 to 3 years, we doubled revenue twice over, and we're far more profitable. So, so for manufacturing, I really learned in that world. I really learned how to work with sort of rank and file, hourly employees, to understand their world and what motivated them. And then with Reach 360, I really got the opportunity to do something similar in the services, but how you motivate people there is a lot different than how you motivate hourly people that tend to be living paycheck to paycheck far more than people that are working in an office job.
Got it. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. So you're no longer doing Reach 360. So how did that business wrap up?
Yeah, so a great question. So to kind of rewind the clock a little bit. So I mentioned I started MTech in 2003, grew that business, 2006, made the acquisition, started a new division. So we went from 10 million to 20 million pretty quickly. I, like a lot of people back then, all of our forecasts were up and to the right. We thought the world was just, it was Beijing Olympics, commodity, everything, things were booming. And we were expanding ourselves. We had bought a new building, we were trebling production in one of our product lines, everything was great. And then the Great Recession hit. And our biggest customer was about a third of sales, went bankrupt, and the bank, got involved. They wanted to put us in a workout. I learned all about how to negotiate with bankers. I had some experience during my previous turnaround work, and basically did the old slid the keys across the table to them and said, "You're welcome to try to liquidate this, but what I know is assets are worth about 10 cents on the dollar, and I'm your best bet to get you way more than that." And knowing that banks aren't in the liquidation business, they blinked, allowed me to run it, kept me out of workout, and we changed our philosophy. And all of the equity owners, so I did learn this lesson, we all cut our salaries by about 60% because we were playing the long game, and we wanted to keep the team together as much as we could so we could innovate our way out. At the end of, and it worked. 8 months later, our customer got bought out of bankruptcy by a private equity company, and we were back in business shortly thereafter and emerged from forbearance not long after that. But that was a really trying year on a number of levels. And for a lot of people with the Great Recession, people lost their homes, jobs, all kinds, wealth, etc. I was fortunate I was in my early 30s to experience that. At the end of 2009, I met my now wife, and I thought she was the gift from having endured what I thought at the time was the hardest stretch of my life, going through forbearance and almost losing that company. So 6 months after we met, we got engaged. It was one of those, boom, just knew it. 6 months after that, we got married. And 6 months after that, I sold most of my steel company. So that was July of 2011. 2 weeks later, she gets diagnosed with breast cancer. And I go from this entrepreneurial high of I've sold the company, got the girl, life is great, to what just happened? You're what? You're 35. I forgot my wife at that time, mid 30s, and you got breast cancer. I just met you. I barely, and so that happened. I got distracted with work because I realized I couldn't be effective in two places. My businesses were 2 hours away in Indiana. My wife was in Chicago. So I chose to be with her. As a result, the general manager that was running my steel company saw an opportunity to go back into business for himself. I had acquired him in 2006. So now I've got some business challenges to contend with. My brother actually left his company to come and help me out there. And then I just lost love of the game. I was actually looking to raise some capital and partner with a company called Horton, which is a big insurance company here in Chicago, to open up in Chicago and start offering services in conjunction with their insurance products. And I just lost the love of the game. My parents ended up getting divorced the day before Christmas. My father throws my mom out. So it was just, one thing after another. So after 2012, I distinctly remember an evening where I'm sitting at our dining room table with my bald, broken wife and my battered mother, not literally battered, but, emotionally battered mother, and thinking like, what just happened? So it was that moment that I decided, you know what, I'm going to commit to Chicago and I'm going to hit the, eject button on my career in Indiana. So I ended up selling Reach 360 to the management team. I tried to sell my steel business, but there was a little bit of an environmental problem with the property that took me about 4.5 years to fully remediate. Which was a blessing in disguise in some respects, because not long after all of that went through, one of the side effects of chemotherapy and radiation is infertility. So my wife wasn't supposed to get pregnant as a result of her treatment. So we hired a surrogate. We did 2 rounds of IVF, put 23 embryos on ice. After 8 months of chemo and radiation, we immediately in 2012 start the surrogacy process. We burned through 20 of 23 embryos in 4 failed transfers. We lose 3 babies at 3, 8, and 11 weeks. Cancer was rough. Infertility, I think, might have been worse, because as a man trying to go through that and be supportive of my wife when there was literally nothing I could do but try not to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. Every time my wife would see a baby, I could just see the crestfallen look on her face, and it just would crush me. I couldn't do anything. Well, needless to say, one day in July of 2013, my wife wakes up, runs to the bathroom, projectile vomits. Boom, turns out she's pregnant. That's a surprise. That Thursday, we have our final transfer scheduled with our surrogate. We had 3 eggs left. I wanted to transfer all 3. The doctor's like, I don't do that. My wife looks at me and says, well, do we want to do it? Like, I'm pregnant. I'm like, there's no way the baby you're carrying is going to make it. Not after everything your body's been through. Plus, we've already paid for the transfer. Our surrogate's pumped full of hormones. Let's just do it. It hasn't worked yet. Like, why stop now? So we do, and it hits, but it's hit 3 times before, kind of put it out of sight, out of mind. A few weeks later, find out not only is it hit and she's still pregnant, but she's pregnant with twins. I come home, my wife's sitting at her dining room table with her hands in her face, looks at me, and she says, what are we going to do? And at this point, I'm just playing this, I'm just playing the odds. I'm like, there is no way all 3 babies are going to make it. Not after everything we've been through. At this point, everything, like life just, we've had our asses kicked for so many times. I was convinced nothing good could ever happen again. Well, boy, was I wrong. We go 3 for 3. And my wife delivers a healthy girl, and 10 weeks and a day later, our surrogate delivers a healthy boy and girl. So I got off on a tangent there, but I forget what your question was. I just started rambling down that road. Where do you want me to bring that back to? Is that how I sold Reach 360, I think?
I don't remember Donovan's question either, but yeah, we can go from there. I think that might've been it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, Billy, obviously, like I remember you going through all of that, but sometimes I forget that is when we met, was like late 2012. So it's just interesting perspective for me, because I think one thing that we appreciated, even when we were down and we would meet with you, you would always come in with such a sunny, positive attitude. And definitely at the time, we could not conceptualize that it was probably, especially like late 2012, one of the darker periods for you. So I think
did you know during that period, Donovan, that all of what Billy had going on,
I think at a very, very high level, but not the intimate details. And I think that just goes to show a big learning and something that I certainly have tried to emulate in business and in life is that even when things are fairly dire, what a difference having a positive attitude and that optimistic approach can have. And it can be incredibly challenging to do that. But I mean, we would not have had the experience we did with Lunalights if it weren't for you and your dedication to us when you were going through all of this. So just seeing that and now hearing that, whatever, 9 years, 10 years later, super interesting.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, as you can imagine, you go through those type of experiences, what it's done for me and how it changed. You know, I got involved with Northwestern as a result of all of this. Like I wouldn't be where I'm at now. I wouldn't have met you had it not happened. You know, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I wouldn't take it away either because it changed me for the better. You know, I had a 3-year earnout after I sold the steel business. So after my wife got done with treatment, that's when I reached out to Northwestern and said, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I'd love to, you know, where can I get involved? How can I give back? I was intentional because I wanted to reboot my career in Chicago. And I figured a great way to do it was to get reintroduced to the Northwestern community in the network. So I came up and they're like, well, we've got, you know, there's Kellogg, there's Farley, and there's Design for America. Those were kind of the 3 entrepreneurial centers at the time on campus. And it just so happened that the first place they introduced me was Design for America. And I believe who was she was a senior on your team. And
Melissa?
Melissa, yeah. She was in the room with Sammy, met her, liked what you guys were doing. I think met with you shortly thereafter. And I remember I used to, after our meetings, I would always just be in the best mood, skipping home and just beaming. And I get back to my wife, she's like, why are you so happy? I'm like, you know, I just had a great meeting with the Lunalights guys. You know, this is what we talked about. And I'm like, I really enjoy doing this. I wonder if there's a way to get paid for it. And eventually working with Lunalights, fell in love with Design for America, started working with Sammy so that she could go from, I think at the time, there was only 6 universities and she and Liz wanted to grow it to 30. And I looked at Sammy and I said, well, how are you going to do that? And she started telling me all the things. I said, no, you're not understanding the question. I said, how are you going to replicate yourself and your brand and what you've created when you go from 6 to 30? You know, right now you're going to have to raise capital, hire people. Like there's a lot more to this. And I'm like, oh. And so they ended up actually bringing in an outside group called Explain, who did a pro bono consulting project. And that's what really transformed Design for America and allowed them to scale up and diversify the revenue stream and became the organization they are today. But I was involved with that, which is what led to my first teaching opportunity at Northwestern. And I remember when they asked me, hey, Billy, you want to teach a class in entrepreneurship? And, you know, inside I'm screaming, yes, absolutely, absolutely, because it was always a dream of mine to teach. But I thought it'd be later in life after I got a PhD or something. And here I am, and they're like, you want to teach a class on entrepreneurship? And I remember laughing because I'm like, how do you teach entrepreneurship? You know, this was 2013, thereabouts.
Yeah, and that was before Northwestern really had many entrepreneurship resources, because I know for us, it was Design for America to have the user human-centered design piece, but then the business piece, they did not have much. It was literally you was what helped us. They didn't have the garage, and like we weren't interacting with Kellogg. The resources were limited. So you coming into that, it was still the early days.
It was really early days. And, you know, there was a number of authors that were kind of, you know, Stephen Blank in the business model canvas were just kind of coming around at that time. And that's who I sort of built the curriculum around, and then just did what a lot of other entrepreneurs did, is built a plane while flying it, and brought in other entrepreneurs to kind of tell their stories and help, you know, simulate what it's like to build a business on campus. And it was a lot of fun. After that, ended up at the garage for 2.5 years, as you know, where I fell in love with mentoring and and got paid for it, which was great.
Yeah. And just real quick, just for our listeners, can you explain what the garage is?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So God, it was a garage. It's 6 or 7 years old now, I think. So I think 2015 is when it opened. So we're 16. Anyway, it is a incubator for student-led startups, graduate, undergraduate, all across campus, doesn't matter. So it's a physical space where these teams can come in and work, study. They've got a maker space. They've got all kinds of resources and equipment. There's funding opportunities, pitch competitions, mentors, office hours. So they do a little bit of programming. I think early on we tried to do a lot of programming. There's so much going on campus. We realized our value wasn't so much in the programming and teaching as it is in just facilitating space and bringing in interesting speakers and interesting opportunities to get some hands-on skill. And then we created our summer accelerator, originally called Wildfire, now called Jumpstart, where we would give teams $10,000, come in for 10 weeks, and basically run them through the gamut of a student accelerator. So early stage startups, and which would culminate in a demo day where they would give their pitches to an audience and some judges, and they would get an audience vote, and then get some additional funding out of that. And that was a lot of fun.
So obviously an interesting experience there. Sounds like you utilized both Design for America as well as your first teaching opportunity as a launch pad to get into the garage and continue working with them. What came next? I think your time with the garage came to an end, maybe 3-4 years ago at this point?
It's probably, I think after running Wildfire the third time, summer of 18, I left. So, I was intentional coming into Northwestern. Like I said, I was trying to reboot my career in Chicago, wanted to get involved in the entrepreneurial community, and I wanted to get into tech. And I kind of checked all those boxes. I met a lot of great people that I'm still in touch with. That's been awesome through the university. I got to do a lot of incredible things, including, building and running that accelerator, which was a catalyst for my approach to business today. And why I'm in an angle I bring to my coaching. And I knew I wanted to get in, join a startup. I figured maybe I'd come up with my own idea, but more than likely I'd join one. And with triplets, your ability to take that kind of risk is a little different. So I ended up meeting a gentleman named Adam Friedman, and he started a company called Pro Habits that was carved out of another company called Mably. Now let me rewind a little bit. When I was at Northwestern, you can imagine being an entrepreneur, a single entrepreneur for a long time. Then I get married. I go through all the stuff I described earlier. I have triplets. And now I go from, signing my own paychecks to working for a giant, institution that is Northwestern, which was awesome. I didn't have to worry about a whole bunch of stuff. Benefits were great, but it was a different environment. It was a world where they measured your output based on the number of hours your ass was in the seat versus what you were actually doing in many cases. And that's just sort of, nothing against anybody or anything there. It's just the way that world works.
It was what you were describing earlier with the steel company. We were trying to bring that entrepreneurial attitude to more of a traditional business environment.
Exactly. So, I remember just sitting in meetings, and the only thing we ever decided in those meetings is we needed another meeting and we needed more people in them. And all I do is count, the amount of time and the salaries around the room going, oh my God, this is a really expensive meeting to not make a decision. But anyhow, that aside, wonderful experience, still, respect all the people that I had the privilege of working with. But I learned that I had to work differently. I had to organize my work differently. I had to approach work differently. So I kind of went down the personal growth rabbit hole. And I also had a philosophy and a different approach to teaching entrepreneurship. I thought there was way too much emphasis on the business and trying to drive business outcomes and not enough on the individuals. My belief is if you focus on the individual and making sure that they have the skills to endure and to survive and to be productive and make good decisions and have the right support and network around them, that the business results will follow. Too often it's taught opposite, and then they wonder why entrepreneurs make bad decisions or burn out and people lose their investment. Now, it's a highly fraught proposition from a risk standpoint anyway, so that's why people invest in lots of startups with the hopes that one or two will. But I believe that we could increase the odds if we spent more time focused on the individuals instead of just pushing on the business. So I went through all this and learned, all about different ways to be productive, about habits, about routines. And Adam was starting this company called Pro Habits, which when they started was all about personal growth at work. And I was really intrigued. I'm like, wait, what I just spent the last 6 to 8 months, 9 months teaching myself, I can actually do at scale for others. I'm like, I'm really interested. So I did some due diligence, shopped it around, actually took it back to Indiana to see if anybody there would be interested. no one bought because we were early, but there was enough interest that got me convinced that, you know what, I'm gonna give this a shot. And so I left the garage at the end of 18, came on. I was moonlighting with them already, and it came on full time shortly after wrapping up at Northwestern, and then spent the next year and a half with them, helping them transform from a solution in search of a problem into, a viable startup. Because when I got there, it was a great, the tech was great. They were in love with it, but they didn't know who actually was going to buy it. So I got to bring all the skills that I had accumulated over my career, as well as during my time at Northwestern, and put my own startup through the same paces I put my students through, as well as fundraising and all the other fun stuff that would kind of come along with it.
Billy, your experience is vast, and it seems like you must always be working. So tell us how you, with 3 babies, well, now they're not babies, but during that period, plus all of the companies you started, and how did you manage that work-life balance? And what are you doing outside of work to keep yourself sane?
It's a great question. With 3 kids living in the city, the weekends I think are busier than the work week more often than not. It's, can my wife and I wear the kids out, wear us out. But what I've learned is, and what I bring to my coaching and with my clients, is that I've retrained how I work. Most of us have this marathon mentality when it comes to work. Let's just grind it out, pound it out. I'm always busy. We wear this busy badge as a badge of honor. And I've realized we really need to approach work like a series of sprints. And so I've revamped how within a day and within a week, how I approach. And I like to do 90 to 120 minute sprints, and then take, 20 to 30 minute breaks. I'll work out, I'll read, I'll do some art, maybe play video games, stuff like that, like during the work week. And what I've learned by doing that is it helps me to slow down, because there's a couple of things and I see entrepreneurs make this mistake all the time. They think they can sacrifice sleep, or they think they can just keep grinding it out and that they're going to improve their performance. But it's really the opposite is true. You kill your creativity and you kill your problem solving skills when you don't get enough sleep and when you don't rest and recover. So I've really, I've found some of my best ideas. I happen to be fortunate enough to have a steam shower. So I like to do a 10-minute, 12-minute steam after I work out. And I find, like, I keep my phone outside, because the nice thing about being in the shower is there's 0 distractions. I can't bring my phone in the shower. I probably could, but I shouldn't. But I leave it out there, and I'll get ideas, and I'll start leaving myself, wet voice memos as I'm capturing these ideas. And it's like 7 or 8 minutes in, all of a sudden it's like bing, 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 bing. I put my dog down last month, so unfortunately I used to take him on walks, and the same thing would happen, especially if I went on a different route, like a 30-minute walk. All of a sudden 20 minutes in, my brain finally had the opportunity to settle. So that's kind of like during the day, I've really learned the value of recovery. At night, I try to read at night. I try to stop working at a certain time. I make sure I have time for the family, to put my kids down, to read to them. That's really important. Other things, because, when you have kids and you've got a career, the first few things that typically go are your friends or your own physical or mental health. So I've made it a very intentional thing where I try to call somebody every day. Doesn't mean I always get through to them, because nobody answers their phones anymore, but darn it, I try. And I've got to, as you get older, you kind of go from wide to narrow with friends. So, instead of having lots of friends that are somewhat, shallow to moderately deep, to, I'm older, I want to go deeper with fewer. So about once a week, I've got a rotation of guys that we call it our mandates, and we get together. We'll either go for drinks, maybe grab dinner, maybe grab coffee, grab lunch, whatever. But I found that I need that, especially after the pandemic, that human interaction to just bounce ideas off, talk about whatever. Talk about our kids, because when you have kids, as much as you say you're not going to, 5 minutes later, you're talking about your kids. So I do a lot of that. And then, I like to travel, don't get to do as much with the kids. So I've had to get more creative, and the pandemic certainly accelerated that. So found a lot of new parks around Chicago that you can drive to that I didn't really even know existed. So that's been fun. My kids living in Chicago, I grew up skiing, but I'm like, my kids aren't going to ever ski. My wife doesn't ski. Well, pandemic, can't fly anywhere. So not going anywhere warm. My mom lives in northern Michigan, so I started taking the kids up there, the last 2 winters, and they just love it. So there and go sledding and hiking and, build snowman and forts and all that good stuff. So, right now I think my life is, now they're all playing soccer. In the spring, I'll be playing travel soccer. So if you're asking me what I'm doing on the weekends, it's probably chasing them around the suburbs and whatever soccer tournaments they've got going on. And then my wife and I, you'll probably find us face planted on the couch Saturday and Sunday night, so or Friday and Saturday night for sure.
You definitely sound like a busy guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't, when you're an entrepreneur, that's the other thing, a lot of people don't realize is, but you never get to really turn it off. I think our brains
that's true.
don't turn off anyway, but that was something that I learned in the family business, and a lesson that I'm glad I learned early is you never really get to put it down when you're an entrepreneur. Like in the family business, you go home for Thanksgiving, most people get to go home, and whether you enjoy your family or not, you're probably not talking about your business, or you're talking about your job that they don't really understand what you do. Well, I'd be sitting around and my dad or my uncle and we're having a strategy session, everybody else like, Jesus Christ, can you put it down? And, so when you go through economic cycles as a CEO or an entrepreneur, you carry that weight of your employees and the families that rely on you with you. And so it's like, I think at this stage of my career, the nice thing about getting into coaching is that I'm ratcheting down that intensity so that I can be with my kids. And then once, they're 4 or 5 years, when, they want me to drop them off around the corner, or daddy's not so cool anymore. Then maybe I'll fire back up the entrepreneurial switch and get back into the game, because I don't think that itch ever goes away.
So you're still teaching currently, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And that along with teaching, you're involved with more than a one business, right? So what are you doing now?
So I still have a steel company in Indiana, and I've hired a new general manager there with the intent of selling him the business this year, because I am looking to do less and go deeper.
Okay.
And so coaching, writing, teaching are kind of the focus right now.
Got it.
And then I'm also talking with Pro Habits, my old startup. I left them at the end of 19 to focus on my steel company, to try to grow it, to sell it. And then COVID happened. So I've taken a 2-year detour on that. And so either, I've got 2 avenues that I'm exploring. One is building my coaching business and doing that because I saw a lot of my friends that had the privilege and luxury of being able to work wherever they wanted to during the pandemic, whereas I was still going back and forth to Indiana because you can't weld remotely. You can't. There's some stuff you could do remotely, like engineering and some of the office stuff, but physical product it's got to get made. So, I wanted to be able to be around for my kids and have the flexibility, and coaching seemed a great fit. Now, if the Pro Habits opportunity comes around, because they're thinking about raising some capital, and I'd come in and do sales and bring the coaching inside. I don't know if you ever saw the show Billions on Showtime. There's a character, Wendy Rhodes, in there. And that's
Love it.
I see myself as a performance coach. I don't have all the psychiatry degrees that she does, but in terms of optimizing people, I would love to be able to do that for a venture capital firm, to go into the portfolio companies and be the coach that really focuses on the human side of the business and supports them, while the VCs and all that mentor network push on the business and really generate better outcomes for everybody.
Admirable.
Yeah.
Sounds fun too. So I know we've been on for quite a while, and I just out of respect for your time, maybe we should try to wrap it up. Any final nuggets of wisdom for our listeners? Things you've learned throughout your journey that you'd like to share, or big mistakes that you've made that we haven't already covered?
No, yeah. So there's a couple, with my students, and I feel like this is probably the nugget that might be relevant to your audience. So, I teach a lot of 18 to 27-year-olds, and my clients are all earlier stage, or tend to be, entrepreneurs that are probably 25 to 35. And I see a lot, when I started coaching, or I started this, I co-created a class because I saw the gaps in what students were being taught and what companies were demanding of them or wanting from them when I was doing Pro Habits, because we were in the learning and leadership development, learning and development space. And so we created this class around resiliency, productivity, habit formation, goal setting, time management, and having difficult conversations and those type of things. And I thought that older, adults would know how to set goals and manage their time and prioritize. I just assumed as we got older, we'd figure it out. That I was the exception that never got that training, but taught myself. But I was the guy. I was just a laggard. Well, it turns out most people really suck at setting goals, managing their time, and actually are not as productive as they'd like to think. So one of the things, there's a couple of things that I consistently work with my students on and with my clients on, and that is how they structure their morning and the power of a morning routine. So the first thing I challenge them to do, and there's a tendency for every student and entrepreneur, the first thing they do in the morning is they check social media or their email. And I explain to them, try to not do that for at least the first hour, preferably the first 2 hours of your day if you can, for the reason of as soon as you open your inbox or check social media, you've immediately ceded your attention and your agenda for the day to somebody else. And now you're in reaction mode. And what I find is when that happens and you get into the email or social media thing, especially for students, on the social media side, it's all about comparison and feeling, sometimes you feel better about yourself, but, a lot of times it's not as helpful for that. And you go down the rabbit hole. Email, same thing. Now you're doing all these emails for these quick dopamine hits, like, oh, I'm making progress, but you're not really going anywhere. You're just kind of staying in place. So I tell my students and my clients, don't, hold off on checking email or social media for at least the first hour in the morning. And then second, do the hardest thing first. And almost everybody knows what that is. It's the thing that they're thinking about, that they know they should do, but they keep putting off, and they keep sliding to the next day, sliding to the next day. It's those things that typically don't have hard deadlines. Like in my world, I'm blogging, so it's writing. So every day I make sure I show up and write. Some days it might be a few sentences, some days it might be a few pages, but the fact that it is, I got to show up every day. That's the hardest thing for me every day. So I do that first. That could be a sales presentation. That could be an email to a client. It could be your pitch deck. Whatever it is, there's something that's really important that isn't necessarily time bound that you should be focusing, especially when you're the most creative and the most alert in the morning, and doing that thing first. And what you'll find when you do that is you actually open up time during the day, because all the time that you used to spend thinking about that thing that you need to do, all that energy and time spent now is actually directed into doing it. And you freed up all of that time and energy to do other things. And you clear your brain. Like, your brain is not a great storage device. So if you're thinking about all the stuff you have to do, but not actually doing it, again, you're blocking your creative and problem solving skills. So getting stuff out of your head and doing the hardest thing first is imperative. And so that's where I kind of start. And then with my clients, I start working on morning routines and evening routines, because you win the day the night before. It's how you wind down. It's how you set your priorities, review your calendar, and kind of get ready for the day the night before. And then what can you do to automate as many decisions as you can? On the weekends, some of my clients will do some meal prep, so they don't have to think about meals for the week. Pack your gym bag, lay out your clothes, pack your computer bag with the things that you need, like whatever you can do so that you're not spending time in the morning. Because I used to do it too. I'd get up, like, what kind of mood am I in? What do I feel like wearing today? I'm not sure I feel like wearing that. I'd spend 20 minutes staring at my closet instead of just grabbing whatever was there and going, or better yet, I would pack it in my gym bag the night before. So I didn't even know until I got to the gym and showered what I put in there. So, and that would, again, it saves time. And then the morning routine, I've experimented a lot with that. I like to use that time to read, to meditate, to journal, to kind of nurture myself, nurture, relationships. I might send some emails or write, draft some emails to people just to tell, kind of gratitude type emails. And I do that the first hour of the morning, and then I go have breakfast with my family, and then I start my day. So
Really good advice.
Yeah. You win the morning, you win the day. Take care of yourself first. There's a reason they say put the oxygen mask on first. So take care of yourself first. Do that in the morning, and then you're not in reactive mode. The day's going to get away from you. Willpower is going to dissipate. If you do the hardest thing first, you're going to find that compounds, and you're going to have a lot more success as you move forward.
Yeah, having a big win first thing in the morning just sets the tone for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. I like that advice. All right. Well, Billy, thank you so much. This has been a very informative and impressive discussion with you. I really appreciate your time. And thanks to Donovan for bringing Billy on.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you, Donovan. Thank you, Mike. I enjoyed our time together.
Me too.
Best of luck to the both of you, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Everybody got a dream, let me show you all love. From an idea, working it into a startup. This the show that you need, what more could you ask for? Never know who become the CEO next door. Tune in, every episode insightful. The type of vibe you will want to subscribe to. Let's go. Hey.